Hello, thanks for joining me. I'm Suzanne Malveaux. Frederica Whitfield is off this morning. Russian officials say that they have bombed targets in Syria for a fourth day straight, including ammunition and oil depots. And there is new video showing one of this morning's airstrikes. The Russian Defense Ministry says they launched 20 since Friday. Now, this comes as President Obama warns Vladimir Putin about his air campaign in Syria, saying it will only lead to further bloodshed. Our CNN's Chris Frates, he is live in Washington with the latest. And Chris, this certainly seems in many ways to be an escalation.
Well, that's right, Suzanne. I mean, President Obama really came out swinging yesterday against critics of his Syrian policy. They've suggested that Russia now has the upper hand there. And you might remember that earlier this week, Russian President Vladimir Putin began bombing what Russia says were Islamic State terrorists in Syria. But President Obama said that's not true, arguing that Russia is bombing ISIS and Syrian rebels fighting to overthrow Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
Mr. Putin had to go into Syria not out of strength, but out of weakness, because his client, Mr. Assad, was crumbling, and it was insufficient for him simply to send them arms and money. Iran and Assad make up Mr. Putin's coalition at the moment. The rest of the world makes up ours. So I don't think people are fooled by the current strategy.
So Russia doubled down on that strategy today, with Russian news agencies reporting that the military plans to increase the number and intensity of its airstrikes. Now, Obama predicted Russia's bombing campaign will leave it mired in a quagmire in Syria, and he said he's not going to turn Syria into a proxy war between the United States and Russia. That, he argued, would be bad strategy. And Obama painted the war as between Assad, Russia, and Iran on the one side, and a majority of Syrians who want Assad removed from power on the other. The United States, Obama said, is only concerned with fighting ISIS and ending the civil war in Syria. And for that to happen, Suzanne, the president said Assad has got to go.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I want to get more on the Russian campaign in Syria. I want to bring in Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer into this conversation. He's a former U.S. Army intelligence officer, and Sarah Firth, she is a freelance correspondent and former anchor at Russia Today. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. And Sarah, I want you to start off the conversation because I suppose we're not really surprised that Russia is continuing the campaign in Syria, but it certainly seems as if there is very little room now for a political solution. Do you see that this is the direction that we're going?
Well, I think, look, there's a lot of tough talking at the moment, understandably, given that you've seen Russia essentially upping the ante by the military action that it's now taking. But you're absolutely right. It's no surprise that this is a step that Russia has taken. We know for many, many years now that they have diplomatically been supporting the Assad regime. And now you've got these military airstrikes that Russia say are aimed at targeting the Islamic State. Now, I think the major sticking points that you have here are, one, that when it comes to any sort of political dialogue and sort of bridging that gap, if you like, and bringing Russia closer into moving towards some kind of political transition in Syria, is that the Putin government still maintain that they want to see Assad as part of that transition. And that's something that we've heard from the US President Obama, many other countries involved very clearly maintaining their line that Assad has to go. And the second concerning thing now with the airstrikes is this issue over what exactly Russia means when it's talking about terrorism. And when I was on the ground reporting in Syria, this issue, the sticking point over that term terrorist was one that came up a number of times, and it's already becoming abundantly clear that when Russia talks about targeting terrorists, it's not just referring to the Islamic State, it is referring very likely to other anti-government opposition as well.
And Tony, we talk about Russia and we think, you know, is there any kind of diplomatic solution here? Is there any diplomacy that's going on? I mean, the president met with Putin. It was just days before this happened, and we saw Secretary Kerry meeting with his counterpart. Well, Russia warned the U.S. just a very brief time before these airstrikes. So what do you think they were trying to accomplish? Do they think they were trying to salvage any kind of relationship in that brief warning, or was it simply a military strategy so that we wouldn't end up striking each other?
Right. Well, let's face it here, when a Russian general shows up in Baghdad with your written warning saying, hey, we're jumping in, that's not really giving us fair warning. With that said, I think we have to be very clear here. As much as I think people are troubled by this, President Obama is completely wrong. His strategy is not working, and I don't care if it is only the Iranians, Assad and Syria and the Russians against the rest of the world. The thing that the president continues to fail to understand is what we must do is fail to give ISIS and other terrorist groups ungoverned space. I think everybody recognizes Assad must go. With that said, over half of Syria has fallen to ISIS. More of Syria is being controlled by other terrorist groups. And as we saw in Libya, the moment you destroy the central government, you have chaos. So I think Assad is being supported by Putin for now is the right answer. We must sustain Syria without destroying Syria to get rid of Assad. So I think what we have to understand is ultimately there's going to have to be a diplomatic solution for now, because ISIS controls over half of Syria, because ISIS continues to rise. Putin is actually doing what we should have done a year ago. Some of these airstrikes I've seen are actually at the heart of both the logistical and command and control of ISIS. So as much as it's painful to see some of the rebels we've trained get caught up in this, and trust me, there's purposes behind Putin going at us. He's making a point. For the larger term, we have to leverage his ability to go in there and take out these rebels and figure out how we can then try to find a diplomatic solution. And I think that's what we're left with.
And Sarah, the president says that he's not going to be engaged in an all-out proxy war. But we are in a proxy war. I mean, it seems like this is pretty clear that that's what's taking place.
Well, right, but I think it is really important to remember when we're talking about the sort of diplomatic process and trying to reboot that, is that you know, for a very long time now, it has been clear that Russia will have to be a part of that. And I think that, again, that's really important given the latest military action. Russia taking military action right now in Syria isn't going to change the fact that such a huge number of people have been killed by Assad's barrel bombs, by the military action the Syrian regime has taken. So it is very clear that at some point Assad will have to go. At the moment, that's a major sticking point in sort of bringing Russia in to the diplomatic solution. But it is important to remember, with all the tough talking that's now going to happen as we try and establish exactly where these Russian airstrikes are targeting, and then if they're not simply targeting ISIS but targeting other rebel forces, well then what will the US and the international community also involved in Syria do about that? And there's a lot of answers that we don't have at the moment, and I think we do have to be quite careful with the tough talking, because further down the line Russia will have to be a part of any diplomatic solution, and we should definitely be looking, I think, to try and put as much pressure as possible on to be getting the Russian government to bring the Syrian government to the table to discuss that.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Sarah Firth, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us for the discussion. It's a very